there is a FileMaker object on that which is no time. It is an object with possibilities as vast as space, as timeless as. It is an object of seamless integration, an object of powerful perform display and processing, and an object of modern interaction. By using this object, moving into techniques, performance and efficiency, of joy and delight at the solution, it is an object we call a viewer. WebViewer was introduced in 2006 with FileMaker 8.5, and I wasn't around back then, but it was a revolution. Do you need to talk
Speak
about
up
it?
just a little bit, yeah.
Well, it was an amazing breakthrough. Even back then, it was a fully featured HTML renderer that could do what browsers of the day could do. We could get data into it via substitution. We couldn't get data out very well at all. People like Digital Fusion, they built a plugin called Reactor that helped to solve that problem. But people were using it way back then. In 2012, we got FileMaker 12 and the FMP URL. This allowed us to finally be able to get data out of the WebViewer and push it back into FileMaker. We could use that URL scheme in our JavaScript code to package up some data and then send it back to a script where it would be captured by the script parameter. We still couldn't get data in very well at all, other than substituting. People like Beeswax and Geist Interactive, they built nice workarounds for this, but that had a lot of limitations. In 2020, we got FileMaker 19, and it kind of gave us everything we need, almost everything we need. FileMaker 19 gave us a new script step in the script workspace that allowed us to send data into the JavaScript, into the WebViewer. And we got a new library, a JavaScript library, that allowed us to bring data out of the WebViewer and into JavaScript, or into FileMaker via a script. Wasn't quite perfect. Oh, by the way, at this point, WebDirect had been solved too. Until then, WebDirect was a pain to work with a WebViewer, especially I think on the web side. But in 2021, we got FileMaker 19.3, which banished Internet Explorer on the Windows side and allowed us, FileMaker developers, to use JavaScript, the same JavaScript for all of the devices, for all of the platforms. Until Internet Explorer was gone, we had to suffer with old JavaScript or put together a compiler that would translate our modern JavaScript to old JavaScript. In 2008, I began my career in FileMaker. I was a teacher and saw that the database that the principal was using was lacking, and he was the only one using it. So I took it over and I built it out for a few years until I had over 100 people using it, showing the data, holding the data of 1,000 students. In 2013, I left teaching and joined Saline Consulting as an application developer, and then Geist Interactive later on. And there, I really began to love working with the WebViewer with JavaScript. Didn't know any JavaScript back then, but I was just plowing through and trying to figure it out. In 2019, I was part of the group that got to write the add-ons that were part of the FileMaker 19 platform. And it gave me a chance really to understand more about the WebViewer and understand how JavaScript works. So that was a good opportunity. And then in 2021, the end of 2021, I went on my own, became my own business of integrating Magic. And my job is to build widgets for people, JavaScript widgets for people, and also train them. I've got about 60 widgets out there in production right now, different clients, and I've trained over 100 people in using JavaScript in FileMaker. So if you notice here, the WebViewer and myself, we kind of go hand in hand. We were meant to be. That's what I like to say. So that brings us to 2024 and the current state of the WebViewer. That's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to look at the features of the WebViewer, its quirks, all the good things we can do with it, and the things that cause us to pull out our hair. It's pretty awesome. I look at this WebViewer as levels as layers. I see 3 layers in this WebViewer. I see an integration layer. I see a display and processing layer, and I see an interaction layer. We're going to take a look at all of these layers and look at the features and the quirks. We got a lot to cover today. There's a lot of features that we're going to look at good examples of. The quirks down below we will touch on. And again, I invite you to share any features or quirks that I just didn't put up on here. We're barely going to talk about the quirks, but I do have documentation, and in the slides, you'll see a more thorough write-up of each of the quirks. All right, so let's get started. On the surface level, it's interesting. I've been using the web viewer for quite a long time, and I kind of have forgotten what the web viewer is. I thought it was a browser, but I think John and I had a good conversation yesterday, and he helped me to kind of understand what it really is. We have this ability to set up a web viewer using this dialog, and it gives us a lot of possibilities. Never in the last 10 years have I used any of the stuff below the first line. I'm always using the custom web address. Is that the same for you? Yeah. I assume there's still some good uses for the Google Maps. I assume that's probably the most useful one. But yeah, I kind of stick with the custom web address. Thing is, I leave this blank, and I use other methods to load it in. Down here, we have some options to handle the web viewer's capabilities. Whenever I go to build a widget, I just have these three automatically checked. Although I'm finding that the automatically encode URL is not something that I have to deal with, because I'm not posting in here a URL that has characters in it that need to be encoded to be read by the web. And the web viewer is again, it's an interesting thing, because I kind of thought it was a browser. You know, it's like Chrome or all that stuff, but it's not really that, I don't think. It's, and again, John and I were fleshing this out. I've decided that it's an object that renders HTML in some manner. So it's not a full browser, doesn't have tabs, it doesn't have profiles, it doesn't have all of that stuff, bookmarks, and it's very self-contained. You can't print from it, you can't export it, all that stuff, but it does render an HTML document. Anything that can be written up in HTML, including container fields. The data inside of a container field can be, under the hood in FileMaker, rendered as an HTML document. So the web viewer is very useful on the surface level, but let's start to dive in. And again, share any features or quirks that you may encounter. I'll just say this, the web viewer can be anywhere inside of your app. There is almost no place that it can't be. It is a very useful object, and of course, it's very flexible. Here's an example of a web viewer that's embedded and integrated into a customer's app. You don't even really know where the web viewer is. It's so well hidden. It's really nice. Here's another one, maybe a little bit more obvious because of the functionality, but it's so well integrated in, just doesn't feel like anything special. This one right here, this is an example from mine. It's a file that I use to to plan out my courses. And again, even though you could probably see where the web viewer is, it doesn't stand out in any good way, other than maybe the awesome features that it provides. And here's another one down at the very bottom. Hard to see in a small screenshot, but that's a little icon that will change to red if somebody else is editing this record. So I know that I can't go and edit this record. Just looking to explore ways to get an indicator on the layout. So the web viewer, oh, here's another one. Lots of nice examples. Barely can see where it is. So the web viewer can be anywhere. And here are the ways in which the web viewer can be anywhere. We'll go through each of these in sort of a example. So when I work with the web viewer, because of the way that the web viewer can be anywhere because of how we work with it, the techniques that we use to get code into it, to get data into it, and so forth. If you rely on calculations or layout objects, you might be a little bit more limited when using the web viewer. But with the features of the web viewer in FileMaker, we can put it anywhere. So let's take a look at this. The code, what we can render. I mentioned this before. We can render any HTML document that we can put in there. no matter how we put it in there. We can render anything that has the HTML tag at the top on line 2 and a closing HTML tag on line 24. If you just want to type something in there, a quick paragraph tag, you can get something to render in there. And of course, we have scripts to help us with that. So here's how I get code in. Here's where I'm taking advantage of the features of the web viewer and a FileMaker to get the code in a modern way. I'm going to say modern a lot because that's how I want to operate here. The first thing I want to do is store the code. So I'm going to store the code in one of two places. I'm going to store it either in a FileMaker field for now or host on a server. I say for now because yesterday in the keynote we saw in progress and on the backlog that's in the community that Claris is trying to figure out a way to allow us to put code into a special place inside of the Draco engine. So we don't have to rely on a field. But for now, I'm going to store it in a field or I'm going to host it on a server. I'm going to access the code using scripted methods, using custom functions, and possibly some calculations. I don't do the third one very often, and I'll walk through my workflow. I typically will use a script because we can run scripts. Scripts are how data and we can get some functionality going. And so we can use a script to load code into the web view. Here's the method that I'm using to do this, which allows me again to put the web viewer anywhere in my app. I have a code. I'm storing the code into a field. I just have it in an HTML field, an HTML layout with a couple of fields, and the code is all stored in there. Talk about how it gets in there. So I'm going to use a script like this, go get the code, and just stuff it into the web view. That's my preferred method of handling getting code in, and it allows me all the flexibility. I can have a web viewer on a student layout with the context of students. I can go fetch the data, the code, and then I can stuff it in the web viewer that's on this unrelated layout. I'll dive down into this script. So the script does a lot of things at the beginning, but here is the part that is focusing on going to get the code. We first name the web viewer. We give it a name there on line 38 because the script step that performs JavaScript needs to know the name of the web viewer. Then on line 41, I run a subscript to go get the HTML. I get it back, and then I push it into the web viewer on lines 45 and 46. The script that actually goes to get the data, the code, is very simple. I'm just opening up a new window, getting in some case, I'm finding, like in 7 and 8, I'm finding which widget I want to use. And then I'm grabbing that code, sending it back to the main script, and going forth. So once I do that, these steps here take my code and they stuff it into the web viewer very, very simply. This is a nice scripted approach to getting code of the web viewer into the web viewer. I do have that pause resume. We'll talk about that as a quirk, but that is kind of a part of this workflow. And it gives me a result. It gives me something. So this chart here is on a layout not entirely based on HTML context, but I can put some code in here. I can also store the code externally. I like this method because it works in the flow that I'm developing with my own code. So I've got this data tables example. We're all familiar with that. What I'm doing is I'm writing the code. I'm writing the JavaScript in a code editor. I'm using VS Code to do that. I'm never writing code in a FileMaker field. Even though I'm storing it in the field, I'm not developing the code in the field. Instead, I'm using VS Code. VS Code has some power to it, and one of its features is to be able to take all of the changes and push it up to the GitHub repository where the code is stored, where the code is managed safely. Once it's up here, my instance of Vercel, where this is hosted, can detect the changes in my GitHub repository, and then it can bring that code up to this server where I have a nice little URL that I can then put into my web viewer. So I'm still using a scripted approach, but instead of going to get the data that's stored locally, I'm just putting that URL there, which is, it's encoding safe. It's not going to be a problem there. And I'm using that inside of the web viewer. Okay. So again, these methods gives us the most freedom to putting the web viewer anywhere we want. So we get our nice results. We can also use a custom function. Custom functions are useful. The FileMaker add-ons use custom functions to go get the data. Here's an example of a Sparkline chart. It's just a quick little web viewer. Actually, it's on this list view too. This is really useful. This custom function idea is really useful when I want to put the web viewer on something like a list view. The custom function is pretty simple. It's just I have a custom function called getHTML. It tells it which widget that I want to get, and then it passes in some data. The custom function, that's what it looks like on the list view. The custom function then goes and gets the data using the code, using the execute SQL. It takes the data in and it does a substitution to push the data into the web viewer. So in some cases, I'll use this method. I prefer the scripted approach. But again, both of these methods, all of these methods allow us complete flexibility with the web.
And if you think that's slow to render in list view, it is.
Well, by the way, I'm getting the code into a field using a process that I learned when working with Todd, where we take some HTML, we compile it using a little command line prompt. We allow VS Code to go grab my code and compile it into one text field. Then this FileMaker script is triggered by VS Code, and it's taking all my code from that file, which is right here in that dist folder, and it's pushing it into the web view, into the field. So I've got this workflow where I can write my code in VS Code, and then I can run a little command, and it takes all my code, compiles it down to one file, which is what the web viewer needs, and then push it into this field. Notice it's complete garbage. We can't read it. We never want to try to work with this, to edit it, because it's minified in every way possible so that it's as small as possible. And that's a feature of web development. That's a feature of VS Code and how I've got this thing structured. Okay. So that allows me to, here's another way that the web viewer is flexible, gives us the ability to put it anywhere. We can take one web viewer, and we can take a lot of different widgets. We can use scripts to say, I want this widget to go into the web viewer. And then sometime later, same web viewer, I want this script to grab this widget and push it into the web viewer. And then another time, we could say, I want this script to pass the table into the web viewer, and voila, we can do that. If we don't hard code this thing with a calculation of HTML, then we're good to pass all the stuff that we want. Actually, I'm going to take that back. We could still hard code this with some HTML, and then we can use the script process to overwrite what's in the web viewer by that set web viewer script set. So this, again, allows me complete freedom. I can place this anywhere. I can have 15 widgets in my 15 dashboards, 15 tables, and it can be in one web viewer. Could also have different data sets. The web viewer is flexible enough, and the whole process is allowing me to take one set of data in a web viewer and then immediately putting another set of data in there. So I have so much freedom with that web viewer to be able to put it anywhere I want in my layout, in my custom app. But we can also use multiple web viewers if we like. This is a little bit trickier. It requires some certain thoughts here, but I can have two web viewers that interact with each other or not, if that's the case. In my case here, I'm using the same code base for the data tables, but I'm just passing it different columns, different data, different columns, different data. And so it's able to show two different sets of data in two different web viewers. And these are, in this example, they are connected. If I click on a row on the left, the related records on the right show up and back and forth. So it's a little bit tricky because it is an interesting scripted process back and forth, but it does work nicely. And we'll talk about the process of getting data in and out later. So here's my two web viewers. I just have them with two different names so that I can use my scripted process to target each one of them. with certain data. And then what's interesting in browse mode for a web viewer, this is recent, as we scroll through records, navigate through records, you can see that the web viewer is loading. But if I revisit a record that was already visited at one point, the web viewer doesn't need to load again. It's the code is all, it remembers. The web viewer remembers the specific data, the specific state of the web viewer for a particular record. So in data tables, where a lot of us are familiar with that, we can sort by the columns. And if I sort by a column in record 1 and then come back to it in go to record 2 and 3. Okay, so I did sort here on record 2. I go to another record. I come back to that record. It stays that sorted. So it's a nice stateful thing. It remembers what you're doing. So that's very useful. Find mode was also recently fixed. In find mode, I now can have a web viewer active and post something into the web viewer to let people know that they're in find mode. That's a big gotcha for some people. They forget that they're in find mode and they start, trying to enter data or something. Find mode allows us to use the web viewer. This is, again, just recently fixed, where they allow us to be able to turn it on or off in find mode. I don't see a point in using find mode, a web viewer in find mode, except for to fill up the gap that the web viewer is at. If you're in find mode, if you're using data tables and you're in find mode, this table has nothing to do with find mode. There's no point in showing data when you're in find mode. So it's a little bit weird, but it is possible now to use it in find mode. And of course, cross-device, mentioned at the beginning, we can use the web viewer on every device without any problem, except for, of course, FileMaker Server, not compatible there. But it can be used pretty well on every single device. And styling, here's a big thing. Styling was always a big factor in working with the web viewer. We can style the contents of a web viewer to match our layout perfectly. It does take some time. It does take some, here's an example of me playing with the, do I have a better example? Playing with the basic theme, the blue theme, whatever it is, and trying to get some CSS to look exactly like the native, the default styling. I am having to write some CSS, so it does take some effort to write some CSS. And unfortunately, there's no way to get the colors, the theme, from a FileMaker layout, turn it into the colors needed. I literally have to look at layout mode, see what the color of the button is, paste that into the CSS wherever it goes. So it is possible to turn a web viewer, oh, there it is, there's my example. So on the left is the native FileMaker objects, on the right is the web viewer. They're pretty close, so I can do a lot with that. So the web viewer can be anywhere. There are quirks, this though. The web viewer is not without quirks when it comes to integration. And here are just a few that I have brought up. Styling is a pain. Unless if your background of your layout is blue and you put a web viewer on it, even if you try to set the web viewer object's background to blue, once you load HTML into it, it's just a white background. So that's a pain to be able to have to deal with that. Let's see, other devices. On an iOS device, the web viewer, if you want to provide some interaction to it, the web viewer is not active right when it loads, right when it's on a layout. In FileMaker, that is certainly the case. The user can drag their mouse, click on something, and immediately interact with the contents of the web viewer. On an iOS device, there's an extra click that you have to do to get the web viewer to be active, or you can start to use it. But of course, there are workarounds. And then other objects on the layout, this is going to be forever, but in Windows, if you have a web viewer and there's a popover around it that opens up on top of the web viewer, on Windows, you're just not going to see the popover. It's going to be consumed by the web viewer. So, and that I hear that can never be fixed. It's an issue with Windows side of the web. All right, let's keep on going. We're going. Display and processing. The web viewer can display anything. The web viewers power gives us the chance to display anything that we want inside of the web viewer. We can, let's go through this. We can use any of the JavaScript libraries that are out there. There are thousands of JavaScript libraries out there, and most of them can be easily worked with inside of FileMaker to display. Data tables is a big one, of course. Very familiar, most of us are very familiar with that. But there's thousands of other ones. There's hundreds of other table renderers out there, and we can use them all. They all have common patterns, and this is what I try to teach people that work with me, is that all libraries have common patterns that allow us to learn how something like data tables works and then apply those patterns to other libraries. So we are able to use any library out there once we have started to use web viewers and libraries out there. Let's see what else we got. Here's an example of me using a library. I've got an HTML document here in VS Code. I'm going to set up some Apex charts. And let's see, what am I doing here? I'm going to import the Apex charts. I've installed it into my repository. I'm going to import it here into my JavaScript. Then I'm going to create a chart object, a chart variable that accesses the functionality inside of the library. Then I'm going to go into my HTML and put a place for the chart, line 12 there. So I'm going to tell the web viewer, hey, I want you to put the chart, I'm going to tell the library, put the chart in this space right there. Then I'm going to say, so that's what I say right here. With this, inside of this Apex charts function, I say, hey, here's where I want you to place this chart when you render it. And here are all the options that I want you to use. So you can see on line 3, there's a variable with some options there and happens to have some data in there. And I'm asking the function right down here, here's where you're going to place the chart. Here are the options that I want you to use. And then I'm going to ask the JavaScript to render the chart. So I'm using the functionality of the library itself to generate a chart and then render it into the web viewer, that space. So that's just a brief overview of the patterns, but those patterns allow us to use libraries over. We can also use complex libraries, things like React, things like Vue or Angular. They allow us to build, those are libraries that build full websites, single page apps or web apps. And they allow us to, we can do that in FileMaker too. We could build a web app inside of FileMaker. Here's an example of a picker that I built for someone. This is probably another one that I'm proud of, where they go through left and right. The data comes from FileMaker, and then they're going through and they're selecting which options they want until they get to the end, when then they put that into a cart. The cart information is then sent back to FileMaker and used. This is a complex app. It was built with React. React handles keeping track of making sure that it knows over here which ones I selected so that it can open up this new window and display those that I've selected as well. So React and those languages, those libraries allow us to build really complex charts, not charts, apps, widgets in our app. We can also throw out any libraries and just manipulate the DOM, the document object model ourselves. We can construct our own HTML using some JavaScript. Here's an example of something I built, a slider. These questions come from FileMaker. The data gets put back into FileMaker as the user is moving the slider. I'll show that in a bit. But that's what this is. I'm not using a library. I'm just using some not tough to learn JavaScript to construct a slider for each question that is in FileMaker, and then put all the stuff in there that I need. So this JavaScript allows me to do this for each of the questions. I wrote this myself. I may have used ChatGPT to help, but I wrote this without a library. We can control everything in that web viewer as well using just some basic JavaScript. I'm going to just say one thing as an aside. This all looks complicated. VS Code looks like a crazy app here. If you've never used it, it can be overwhelming, but it's not. It's really something that every FileMaker developer can learn. And that's what I am hoping people do. That's all I'll say about that for now. But it is we can understand this. We have a script workspace. It kind of is similar to this, although this is much better. And so I just want you to know that. Don't feel like you can never learn this, because we all FileMaker developers can do that.
And I'll toss in that there are other reasons to use VS Code.
Yes. I mean, if Jay learned this with me, then
It's
anybody
true.
could,
It's
right?
true.
Yeah.
It's true.
All right. I mentioned this. We can also use local data. That gives us the flexibility when we display. We can display any kind of data that we want from our app. It doesn't have to be related data. It can come from anywhere. We'll talk about that. Here's the records there that I've got in my survey, and those get pushed into the web viewer. I'm using a script here to go fetch the data using this execute FileMaker data API script step. But I've constructed this template script that I can use over and over that allows me to go fetch the data, send the data back to the main script, which then gets put into the web viewer. We'll look at that. But we can use any local data. It can come from any table without consequence. So there we go, what it looks like. There are a lot of quirks to displaying web viewers, and I'm sure this is where we could talk forever on it. The two most common ones that I see in the community is printing the web viewer contents and exporting the web viewer contents. It's not possible like we could do in a browser. We can't hit Command P and print the web viewer. And if we try to put that on a layout that gets put into preview mode, it just goes away. We lose all of that. None of this is we can overcome all of these, but it's just a quirk that we have to deal with. So if you're using a web viewer and your client wants you to be able to print it, then you have to find the solution. And I do have more information about that elsewhere that we can. Handling the library's code is a big one. So that one there, I just want to point that out. That's definitely a quirk when it comes to complex libraries. I did this too. You may have seen my web viewer integrations file that I put together where I had a bunch of fields that held all of the CSS and the JavaScript, the different JavaScript libraries. It got really complex to be able to take all that code and substitute it into a web viewer so that it can be read as one document inside of the web viewer. And the more complex libraries that you work with, the more trouble you're going to have taking all of these dependencies and smashing them together into one content. Again, there are workarounds, but it is definitely a quirk to deal with when you're working with the library. The web viewer can process data much faster. So we all know FileMaker can do its best to process data, to process JSON, process anything, any functions. We could probably write a custom function to, create the standard deviation of a set of data. But JavaScript can do that already. JavaScript, there are libraries, there are methods out there that give us the ability to process data much faster. I have a couple here that's in the middle there that are useful. D3JS is one of them. Lodash is a great one that has functions in it that take arrays, for example, and find the unique items or filters out certain items, whatnot. So there's a lot of possibilities. JSONata is a big one. We've heard of that. Kevin Frank and I did a blog post about that. I know Matt Petrowski has talked about it a lot too. There's a lot of processing libraries out there. JavaScript also has methods built into it that allow us to process data much faster. I use this one all the time, where I give JavaScript an array of numbers or array of objects, an array of records, and I can ask it to go and find whichever element here, whichever part of the array meets a certain criteria. And that, especially when you're working with JSON, that is so much faster to process it in a web viewer than it is to try to build a script to handle that. Okay? And I mentioned ChatGPT earlier. I use that all the time. I give it a prompt and I ask it to help me. I ask it in this case to format a date in JavaScript. So it gave me the ways to do that. I can copy this and put it into my code, and the workflow that I use when I'm using processing is that you have to, using just the web viewer, you have to have the web viewer on a layout to be used. So what I typically do is I'll build a processing layout that's just a small window that has a web viewer somewhere on it. When we're working in Pro or iOS, we can have the web viewer off to the side. That's okay. We can still access it and get data from it, even if it's on the side. If we're in WebDirect, if we're building for WebDirect, the processing layout, the web viewer has to be on the layout that is on top, that is the active one. So this is how I flow through it. If I have a JSON object array over there, and I want to turn it into CSV, which this example would do, when I hit that process JSON button, this processing window pops up. The web viewer is somewhere, probably over here, and I'm using my script to access it, to push in data, to tell it which function to run, and then to get the data out. And so I do that. Let's see, here's the script flow that I follow. So I start with grabbing the data that I want to process. Then I open up the processing layout there. In this case, the processing layout is in the context of the HTML. So I don't actually have to do any loading of the HTML because the web viewer is set to read from one of the fields in the layout's context. And then I just tell it, hey, here's the web viewer I want you to work with. Here's the function on line 11 that I want you to process. And then I'm going to use the perform JavaScript in a web viewer function to pass the function in to tell it which function, pass in the data. And then what happens at that point is that the web viewer here gets all of the code, gets the function, it processes the data, and it spits out, or it causes a script to run that grabs the data on line 3 from the JavaScript, puts it into a global variable on line 5, and then the parent script, the one that was running, can take from the global field, the global variable, put it into the field, and then it's worked. So this is what it looks like at the end. Hit the button, the processing window pops up, and suddenly the CSV shows up there. That's a nice scripted workflow to work with this. Working with this the quirks of processing are quite actually they're the same as everything else that we've talked about: placement, display, integration, all that stuff. In this case, the web viewer is invisible, so we don't have to worry about its styling, for example. But we do need to be careful of where it's placed. I could just skip what I was doing. I could put the web viewer right here. A lot of people will do that, a 1 pixel by 1 pixel item, or put it over here off to the side of this layout. I just like the idea of having a processing layout that shows people that the data is processing so that they understand what's happening. But the web viewer could be on that layout on its own, so we don't have to worry about building that. And then setting up and using functions. So there's a lot of functions out there. I'm taking a statistics class right now, and I'm interested in writing some JavaScript that can handle finding the median and the mean and the standard deviation. Stuff that FileMaker, other than the mean, I don't think FileMaker can find with a function the median of a set of data. But there are JavaScript libraries that handle all of those central tendency measure calculations. So I just have to build up a library of those and then tell the web viewer which function I want to run. So it's a little quirky in that you're basically building up a function. You're building up an HTML document that has a bunch of functions in it that you call. It's like a bunch of custom functions that you might call, but you're doing it in a separate location in a web viewer, in a HTML document. Again, it's all quirky, but it's not a roadblock for us. And of course, number 2, planning for use in a script. That's the most difficult part. You've got to understand what's happening with where the web viewer is at. Once it's done processing data, it will trigger a FileMaker script to run. But you've already got a FileMaker script running. You've just got to handle this script, interrupt script workflow. Just something to consider. So that's a nice way to do it. But processing, this is really nice, and it's nice to be able to create a library of functions that I can use to process data. Again, people have been talking about the JSONata library. There's a lot of functionality in there that we can access in this way. So when it comes to display and processing, I've mentioned this a lot of times, but it's a good idea at this point in our web viewer work to actually adopt a modern way of working with JavaScript FileMaker. Use modern tools to write the code like VS Code. Use code in the modern way. Use the most modern code, and you let VS Code help you keep the code structured. Use ChatGPT to give you the answer to it. And the last one, let modern tools handle prepping for FileMaker. So there's a whole workflow I'll show at the end. But if we do what web developers are doing when we write our JavaScript, it'll be efficient, we will have success, and it'll be a good way. Yes, you've got to learn VS Code. You've got to learn some JavaScript, but it's way better than trying to write JavaScript in the FileMaker field. That's just definitely my opinion. All right, interaction. Let's talk about the pleasing interaction of a web viewer. The web viewer gives us so much nice interaction. People love to be able to drag items, click on things, and see a hover state. They love that modern interaction, and we don't have that possibility so much in FileMaker. Yes, we have a hover state, but there's a lot we can do from files. There's a lot of interactions, and it's not just those cool things like hovers or tooltips that show up. It's getting data in, it's getting data out. So here's where we're going to really dive in if we haven't already, and I'll try to show some examples as well. So we can control the loading of the web viewer. I find this a useful feature. I prefer this method. I mentioned way back at the beginning, I use a script to load the code and the data into the web viewer. I like that approach rather than just letting the web viewer relying on its calculation features. Because again, I can control when this thing is loaded. And this allows me, to put different put different widgets inside of the same web viewer. So if I have control over it via a script trigger on the layout, then I can do anything I want with this web viewer. That's what, there's always been a big debate about using things like calculation, like execute SQL in a calculation field, because we can't control when it actually is going to fire. I kind of adopted that for working with the web viewer. Let's see here. So let's talk about the getting data in, because this is a big part of what we'll do every day. And this is, again, what makes it so much more flexible and gives us great interaction. I'll go through some slides here, and then I'll show you an example. We can get data in three ways that I work with. We can substitute it in. We can load with the widget. We can load after the widget. I'll demonstrate those here. So we start with the substitute in. This is a tried and true method for getting data in. We have data in our database. We have a calculation of some sort that has some sort of placeholder text like that, the data there, and that is put in our HTML. And using the awesome power of the calculation engine of a script or the web viewer itself, we can substitute data in the HTML. The data goes into the web viewer, and our data is visible. That's good, but if this data was in a field and that field changes, the web viewer is going to get wiped out because that calculation was re-triggered. Depends, of course, on how you load it. But this is a legitimate way of getting data. Here's an example of it. This is from my web viewer integrations file. That's exactly what it does. Got a bunch of calculations there, substitutions, and it just puts all the data into the HTML over there on the left, and all is good. Here's how I get data in, though. I load it with the widgets. So in this case, my script grabs the HTML, it grabs the data, and it pushes it in at the same time. And it's done, I got this out of order, but it's done via a function inside of our JavaScript. So this JavaScript, there's a load chart function there that takes in some JSON as a parameter, and then it's used throughout. So it's used, the JSON is eventually used throughout to put into the chart. On the FileMaker side, what happens is I run a bunch of scripts to get data, to get configuration options, and then clear down, let's see, there's my configuration. Here is my setting all of my JSON into all of my configuration options, all my data, everything into one JSON object. And then down here, I take all of that JSON and I stuff it into the web viewer at the same time in the same script as the HTML is loaded. So back up here, all of this script is run at the same time. The HTML is right here. Where is the HTML? The HTML is set into the web viewer right here. And then further down in the script, the data gets passed in. So it's all at one time. Right? So that just ensures that when the data tables loads, it loads with the data. Okay, so you see nothing, and then all of a sudden you see a widget and you see all your data. Okay? Because the HTML and the data are loaded at the same time. Okay? That's one good way to do it. You could also, this is a little bit more complex, you could also load the data after you've loaded the widget. So you start, this is a whole scripted process. You start with the widgets, with the HTML, push it into the web viewer. That HTML, with the JavaScript inside, the JavaScript says, oh, I need to go fetch my data. So it goes back to a script. It triggers the script to run and says, hey, script, go get the data that I need to display. The script will go to the database, get the data, then it will send it back to the script, then it will send it back to the web viewer, and then suddenly your data is in there. So in this case, the web viewer loads the data tables frame. It loads the columns and the filter box and the pages. Well, it wouldn't load the page because it doesn't know the data. But it loads some things, and then right after this process is done, the data can get pushed into the library, and it can get loaded. I will show a concrete example of this. So here's actually what I'm doing. I've got a script here or a function called loadbar2, and it's set up to go fetch my data after the web viewer has loaded this function into itself. So it's a little bit complex process. We'll look at it in the actual example. That's how this is working. I'm using on line 13 a function there to go fetch the data. This is a little bit more complex because I'm having to do this asynchronously. In JavaScript, the HTML runs from top to bottom. It doesn't stop. But I'm going to have to tell the JavaScript on line 13, hey, I want you to await for some data. On on line 4, I'm telling it, hey, this function is asynchronous. So you're going to have to do some stopping inside of this function before you can finish. So at the very top on line 4, it says async. And then on line 13, that's where it's saying, all right, stop the entire script from running until this variable is filled with the data that it fetched from FileMaker. Again, I'll show an example. But this is a process by which we can get data in after we've loaded the widget. And there's some nice use cases for that. You want to display something in the web viewer, a nice loading indicator, and when the data is ready, it gets placed into the web viewer. Getting data out is a little bit more straightforward. Really only one way to do it. You have a button inside of your web viewer, inside of the JavaScript, click on it, or a row, and it runs the function that's attached to that button runs a FileMaker.perform script function that sends the data back to FileMaker. Okay. So the data that comes back from FileMaker from the web viewer gets captured as a script parameter, and then we can pass it into the table. There's something up here, if I can get this. No, it's not going to work. Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. Right there in this box here, I'm performing this script. This is the FileMaker library function that gets injected into FileMaker, into the web viewer. I'm asking it to run a script called sendData, and I'm sending back this object that has been stringified inside of the JavaScript. Okay. FileMaker can only handle strings of text. When an object is constructed inside of the JavaScript, it's not a string, it's a literal object. So FileMaker can't read that, but we need to stringify it, just turn it into a big long string so that FileMaker can rotate. So that's how you get data out. Again, that gives us all the freedom we want to interact with the web viewer. The same example shows how we can trigger FileMaker scripts. So again, something inside of our JavaScript can trigger a FileMaker script. It's very nice using that FileMaker.perform script JavaScript function. And of course, we can do the other way too, which is the benefits of the latest versions of FileMaker is we can run, I've shown this many times, but inside of a FileMaker script, we can run this script step that asks for the name of the web viewer, it asks for the name of the function, and it asks for any parameters you want to send it in and into it. And that function here will find that script step will find this function, and it will do with the data that it needs to do. Just a quick note on this. This is a weird quirk, is that the function that we're trying to trigger from FileMaker needs to be put on the window of the browser. The window is a top level of the browser that FileMaker can only reach. So FileMaker can only reach to the top layer. Without this line here, this function is buried inside of the JavaScript and is not accessible to FileMaker. It's accessible to the web viewer, but FileMaker can't reach it. So it has to be put on the window. Here's one way that it is put on the window. With just a window dot, here's the variable name, and here's the function. FileMaker is actually going to find this one right here, and it's going to trigger this to run, which is equal to this function, which will run this. All right? You don't have to be an expert in this in this hour, but this is the features of the web viewer. We can also refresh the data. This is, to me, the most exciting part of working with a web viewer in FileMaker 2023. We can have the web viewer sitting there on the screen, and periodically it just goes fetches its data and displays the new data if there's anything that's changed. That's a nice process where we can run that full scripted process, but inside of the JavaScript, we've built a set interval function that is similar to what is our function? What is our
Timer.
The layout timer, right? Install
Timer.
timer. Yeah, I never use it, so I forget the name of it. But we can ask JavaScript to every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds to run a script to go get some data, and if there's any changes in the data, to throw it into the web viewer or update what's there. I'll show an example of this, so please don't think you have to get it all from there. So let's take a look at an example of this. So here's an example of a web viewer here that I have on the left side. The code is over here just to show you everything about it. The way I have set this up is that I've got a bunch of buttons up here. This button here does everything at once. It loads the web viewer with the JavaScript and it loads the data at the same time. So I'm just going to run it, and you see nothing. It's really fast, but you see nothing, and then you see everything. Okay? If I go into layout mode, go back to browse mode, and I run it, you see nothing, and then everything. For the next one, I'm going to turn on the script debugger so you can see it. The load 2 is going to do that loading of the JavaScript first, and then fetching the data. So it's going to get the HTML right now, setting it into the browser. Now it's going to immediately, everything that I set into the web viewer, one of the functions in there says, hey, run this script called fetch data. The fetch data script goes and fetches the data, in this case just a random number to display, and then it passes it back to the web viewer, and the web viewer will be updated. In this case, it didn't work because it was too slow. It will time out after a certain time. But you can see that the web viewer has loaded the library. It just doesn't have any data. Let me try to run this again a little bit more on speed. All right, so let it run. Here's the fetch data. You can see over there on the left, the web viewer is loaded, and boom, now we have, so it loaded the web viewer first, then it went and fetched the data. See that? Yeah, okay, so that's a nice feature of it. Here's an example of me triggering the FileMaker, triggering the JavaScript from FileMaker. In this case, it's simply just running another script called setProgress that goes and gets some more data, another random number, and then puts it into a JSON object. And then on line 11 there is going to trigger a function to run, passing in the data. I'll show you that function in a second. So there it is. It's just updating the web viewer. And notice, because of this process, I don't have any web viewers blanking out. That's been a limitation of using the web viewer for a long time, is that if you wanted to update it, you had to wipe the whole thing out and start over. You don't have to with this, what we call round trip or two-way communication method. In this case, that button there was triggering this script to run, which takes the data in, it gets the progress out, and then it updates the progress bar with the number that I have sent in. So this gives us some nice integration. And that's what this last one does, is if I click that, this is that periodic fetching of data again. So in this case, I'm just sitting here, and if I'm watching a progress of a project being done, I can just glance up, and every once in a while, the progress has changed. It'd be really weird if the progress of a project did this. Hopefully, you would collect the data a little bit more correctly than generating a random number. But this is the power of working with the web viewer. This gives us some great interaction. We can just let it run itself. Then I can stop the update from happening. All right. Quick other example. Let's get rid of that. This, I'm going to go back to VS Code and do this. Open recent, manipulating up this FileMaker file. Here's that the progress or the survey. In this case, I have the survey here on the right, and over here is the answers. Are the answers or the data in a portal. And I can give my users the ability to drag this, and then when they're done, it goes and updates it inside of the table. So you don't see anything happening. A script is running, the script is fast enough that there's not going to be any conflict of what the user is doing and what the script needs to do. But this is a good example of showing how data on the left gets updated when the user is finished dragging it. So, a web viewer gives us a lot of great possibilities. It gives us a lot of great interaction possibilities. There are a lot of quirks with interacting with the web viewer. If you were to just display a table of data, fine. But if you want it to interact somehow, you have to consider these quirks. The first one is the web viewer needs to breathe. When you load code into a web viewer, it's also loading, as a FileMaker 19, a FileMaker JavaScript library. So the FileMaker Pro app injects into our code, into the web viewer, in a library that we can access. But we have to make sure that the web viewer has been loaded with the FileMaker library before we try to use it. So that can get a little bit tricky, because if you do what I was doing, where you're fetching the data immediately after loading it, you have to make sure that the web viewer has all of the code loaded into it before you try to do it. Number 5 is interesting. I talk about this in my community with other people. FileMaker scripts are run. So all of these processing has to run using scripts. So you saw me dragging the progress bar, the slider. As soon as I lift up, the script has to run. So that has to be a consideration. If there's a lot going on your layout and a script is running to fetch data or whatnot, then we could have problems with scripts overlapping each other. They don't actually overlap, but they definitely interrupt each other. So definitely have to consider that. All right, so we'll move on. So that is the web viewer, its features and quirks in an hour. Now know everything you need to know about the web viewer. I'm sure there are other quirks that I didn't put up here. These are the ones that I encounter every day when I'm working with the web viewer, and I work with the web viewer every day. So just know that if you handle these quirks, or if you understand these quirks, you're going to be pretty successful in using the web viewer. But remember, the web viewer can be anywhere. The web viewer can display anything. The web viewer can process data much faster. The Web viewer provides pleasing interaction. Yeah, so those are the layers of the web viewer. We took a deep dive into it. I would recommend you attack your web viewer, and you start to understand its features and its quirks a little bit more. If you're using data tables, that's great. Add some interaction to it, add some row clicking, and use the modern way to get the data out of the web viewer. Don't use the FMP URL anymore. It's dead. You should never use that again. I mean, it's still there, but you shouldn't use it because there are other ways to do it. I do this. I help people learn this stuff all the time, and so I would recommend you join. I will do a little bit of a promotion here, but I have a community called JSN FM, and it's where we talk about this stuff. Jay and I meet with a bunch of people every Thursdays for office hours, and we just have a good time talking about JSN FM. If I can get him to not talk about FileMaker or other things.
What are you saying?
What are you saying?
You want to take this outside, dude?
No, it's a great opportunity to share what you've been working on, to share struggles and so forth. So, and just start learning and practicing. Give some time to this. A long time ago, Todd, guys did a presentation. JavaScript is eating the world. It still is. It's still eating our FileMaker world, and it's only going to get more hungry, just like I am right now. But it's going to get that. So the second one there, I showed a lot of VS Code and a lot of stuff. In order to use these modern tools, you do need to set up your computer to work with those. It's not a big deal, but you will have to use VS Code, start to use that a little bit. That's what I would encourage you. That's what I'm here to do, is to support people in their FileMaker, their JavaScript and FileMaker journey. So that's what I would recommend. But hey, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for listening and being a part of this. I hope I didn't blow your minds too much. It's a lot. Use the documentation. Also, you can go to jsninfm.com, and I'm going to have all of this written out a lot better. So feel free to visit that website, jsinfm.com, and there I explain all the features and the quirks in more detail. All right, thank you.
A quick question.
Yes, let's do questions. Yeah, okay.
I just discovered few weeks ago, I'm using WebViewer with a library like Char.js and stuff like that. Discover an undocumented feature.
Okay.
I didn't say bug. I tried to print on SOS,
Yep.
on Performance server, a WebViewer, and everything is blank.
Yep.
On Mac and on Windows.
Yep.
I'm not the only one who
You
believe that.
can't print a web viewer. Not easily. You have to do some workarounds. You
I
have
can
to.
print it on client side.
You can.
On the server side, I cannot. No solution? No idea?
No. That's interesting.
Without a plugin.
Without a plugin.
Yes.
Charts.
Sure.
You can print Google Charts.
On a web viewer, yeah.
So it's interesting. So there may be libraries that are better.
But there's weird Google Charts. There's like two versions. There's like a original and like a newer. And the
Okay.
newer one you have to use a specific function
Okay.
through the JavaScript, but the original one.
What I would do is I just grab the image, the chart and turn it
That's
into
what
a
it, that
PNG,
is, yeah.
and then send it over to a container field. Yeah, that's how I do it.
This is the only solution.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, so for data processing,
Yeah.
how it works great locally, on
Yeah.
the client. Have you found a workaround or a trick to get this to work server side?
It just doesn't work. The web viewer is not compatible server side.
How do you handle that? What other methods do you use?
I guess I would just have to rely back on FileMaker. Christian? Yeah. I think Christian's plugin can do this on server without a web viewer, but I'm not sure. I haven't used it, but I think so. I would just rely on, FileMaker functionality to do it.
Honestly, JavaScript's going to process whatever it is so much faster
Yeah.
on the local machine. The round tripping it back to the server to update is negligible.
But that's a good quirk that I haven't solved. So, any other thoughts? Yes.
You were clearing out the web view.
Yes. Every time. Yes.
What's the difference here? Why clearing it first and then setting it?
That's a good point. I just want it to be clean. I don't have to. I think it's just workflow set of script steps that I adopted when I worked with Todd. So it was just something that I do without even thinking.
Okay, so there's nothing about
There's nothing about it. I don't
the
think.
web
No.
viewer
No.
better first.
I would always clear it out because it's just one step, and then the next step is to set it.
Okay.
So I don't know. I'm not sure of any difference. Yes, sir.
All my users are WebDirect users.
Okay.
And on one slide, you had something about limitation on resizing.
Yes.
And I actually have that problem.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah, but it's complex. It's tough. You have to store. So on a WebDirect, if you resize a browser, the web viewer will blank out. It's a pain. It's really tough to deal with. The solution is to store that code in the local session of the browser. And then because the web viewer will pick up what's in the local session when it's done resizing. I think that's the solution. I don't have a good solution for it. It's really complex.
When I resize,
Yep.
window resizes, of course, but
Yep.
the content does not. That's my problem.
But it also, but it also blanks out too, right?
No, actually, it doesn't.
The web viewer doesn't blank out?
No, no,
Okay.
it won't stay.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Well, hey, I'm around all week, so just feel free to ask me any more. Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
Real quick, you mentioned you had a workaround for something earlier. I created a sliding toggle switch in WebViewer. In iOS, you got to tap to activate the WebViewer, then tap again to actually do the toggle switch. I guess that's a memory thing or something I read. I don't know what it is, but what's the workaround on that?
My script would just go to that object.
I tried that and I didn't get to work unless I'm missing something. I tried going to object, see if I could like activate it.
Oh, no?
I still have
Okay.
to tap it twice. You have to tap it to activate it and tap it to slide.
Interesting.
Unless I didn't have a parameter or something set.
I don't know. That's, are you naming the object and going to that specific object? Okay. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Bring it to my office hours. Let's just take a look at it. All right. Join me in office hours. All right.
I saw that you were having
Thank you.